Okay, hello everyone. My name is Chenkai and a PhD student in educational study at the University of Windsor. I'm also a member of published team of Journal of the Canadian Association for Curriculum Studies. Today, I'm so happy to have a conversation with Dr. Susan Drake from the Brock University. Hi, Dr. Susan Drake.
Hi, Chenkai.
Hi. So before that, I would like to introduce Dr. Susan Drake briefly. She is a professor at the Department of Educational Studies at Brock University, Canada. She's interested in global educational reform and curriculum innovation. She's fascinated by what education looks like in the 21st century from K to 16. Her research has been centered around the seamless connection among curriculum, instruction, and assessment. In particular, she has investigated integrated curriculum and its implementation in a wide variety of contexts. Another facet of her work is narrative research. She believes that humans make meaning through storytelling. For her, we can work with story for personal and professional transformation. Thank you, Dr. Susan Drake, for accepting this invitation. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Okay, thanks. Your work titled Developing an Integrated Curriculum Using the Story Model that was published in 1992 by the Oise Press focuses on the integrated curriculum. How does or may this work contribute to the field of curriculum and education?
Oh, you're starting me off with a very big question. As you can note, this was published in 1992, so that is almost 30 years ago. And this was a curriculum model that was actually commissioned by the large school boards of Ontario. And it was put together by a team of 5 different people from across the province. And we balanced the people. They had to be elementary or high school and represent different subject areas and represent different areas. So there was a lot of diversity on the team itself. And we worked for 2 years to create this model, which was based on something that I had done when I did my doctoral work, which was to connect mythology to holistic curriculum. When I started that project, I really didn't know very much I knew about holistic curriculum only in that I taught one, and that I didn't really know the theory behind it much. And I really didn't know anything much about mythology at all. So after I took on that project, and it turned out into a little book called Holistic Learning that was published, 1990, I guess. Then they hired me to create this curriculum with a group of other people. And so that ended up being the story model. It's been around a long time. When it first came out, it was received by the province very positively and welcomed, and people were encouraged to teach it right up until we got into standards-based curriculum. When that happened and the whole accountability movement happened, people moved back into the disciplines because this is actually a transdisciplinary model.
Right.
And it works very well with issues and wicked problems like we have in the 21st century. So it's kind of a curriculum now that's very suitable for the times. It can work in any subject area or with any issue. I've seen it with probably 4,000 or 5,000 different issues being worked out by students in classroom, even down to kindergarten. So, and right up, I use it all the time up in higher education now. So it's a powerful piece of work. Maybe you could put up a picture and I could just talk to it for a minute or so.
Sure, just bear with me for a moment. Okay. Sorry, just give me a second. Can you see the picture now?
I can, so.
Okay.
And you, I hope you can too.
Yes.
So if you see this model, it's really a model about change, but it's talking about changing the story that we live by. So it can be used in a personal way. I actually teach graduate courses using this for personal and professional transformation. But it can also be used to study any social issue that's going on in the world outside of us. And because it comes from so many different places, that's why it's transdisciplinary. It doesn't begin with any discipline. It begins with the issue, or it begins with yourself. And as you can see, there are 4 frames of it that are personal, cultural, global, and universal, outside of the model itself. And those frames are about our ways of knowing, and that we can't forget these, that the thing that we know the most is from our personal story, which is influenced by our own cultural story, which oftentimes we don't know that much about. I mean, we live in the culture and we take things for granted. So there's a lot of deconstruction and critical thinking that has to happen there. How much of I am affected by my personal cultural story? And then after that, there's the global story in the global world that we live in today. And finally, the universal frame, which is it's more of a spiritual lens. Some people actually leave that lens out. They don't believe in that part. So, but for me, that's an important part. And for the holistic educators, that frame is also a very important part. It's about what connects us as human beings to each other. And then in the middle of the frame, you have the story itself. And the story is always changing. I've been doing this since, like you said, 1992. I've seen it work through incredible contexts. For most recently, for example, the stories in Canada that have changed. The marijuana story is a perfect story to look at through these lenses, because the story has changed in dramatic ways. And in 1992, you would never ever believe that today we could buy marijuana legally and sell it legally. And then there are many other stories that have changed as well, like women's story, and all of the professions have changed. COVID is changing us right now in dramatic ways, not just in education, but the whole world is being changed. So this is a framework inside that we can look at what's going on in our world and how do we make sense of it. And if we are changing, how do we change in ways that we want to change? That's a positive change. So if you look, it starts at the present day story in the middle and goes back and looks at the old story. If I take the pandemic, I don't have to go very far to get to the old story. Only a few months ago, where was life the old normal, and now suddenly we are in what people are calling the new normal. The present day story is the new normal, but we all know that we all hope that that's not going to be the story forever, that there's going to be a new story that comes out of this. So we look at the old story, we look at the values that people have and explore that and say, well, what happens if we keep on acting the same old way? And then how might we want to replace that? What values might be better? So in the middle of it, you see the present day story. There are 2 arrows that go in opposite directions. And those are the 2 arrows where there's a dialectical process going back and forth between competing values. So for example, in the COVID, and this is very simplistic what I'm saying right now, the one side says economy and jobs, and the other side says health. And you see them go back and forth and back and forth. Schools opening, schools closing, masks on, masks off. So there's these different value systems, and then somewhere in the middle is the new story, where we will, I don't know what will happen with the pandemic. Hopefully there's going to be a vaccine, but maybe we find a new way to live, because during this period of time, at least in North America, there's been a lot of other issues that have come up, including racial issues, equity issues, all kinds of different privacy issues, many, many different things that come from the old story that we are now looking at through the lens of the pandemic and saying, okay, we need a new story. We need new ways to work with our lives. And so from there, we decide together, collaboratively, because this is a collaborative problem-solving model, really. Mm-hmm. What does that new story look like? and what's my story? So that very last little box is my story. What do I do in my story to commit to making the new story happen? So it's actually a very hopeful model, and its essence is about values, but there's a great belief in people, and that we're intelligent beings, and we want to do the best that we can do, and we want the best for others. It's sort of behind this whole frame.
Okay.
So that I needed to, because the story model, I think, for a lot of people may not at this moment have that much meaning, but now you've seen the picture. It is transdisciplinary, all of the disciplines. So if I just take any topic, I'll just give you a short example. With two girls in grade 12, they were doing independently, they were using this for their independent project, and they didn't want much work. So they decided they would look at a kind of shampoo. And they thought, well, we like beauty, we'll do this kind of shampoo, and it'll be nothing in the study. And 2 months later, we're embedded in, they got into the marketing, they got into the chemistry, they got into the actual beauty products of it all. They were so deep into a project that they'd started off thinking was simple, but once they embedded it in this model, it wasn't simple at all. So that's the other thing about this. You need to look at everything through many different lenses at the same time. So if I put the hair shampoo, let's say it was Dove shampoo, I need to look at it through an economic lens, through a health lens, social issues, politics, law, technology, global. Once I start looking at it not just through one discipline, but through many, many different lenses, I see that things are interconnected, and that I can't just solve a problem coming through one doorway. I have to be able to look at all of them, see the connections, and begin to work with that kind of way. So this model actually deals with complexity and multi layers and the tangled web of a wicked problem.
Right. Can I stop sharing the picture?
Yes.
Now? Okay,
Yes.
Thanks. So thanks for sharing, Dr. Susan Drake. And I also noticed you published a journal like in 2000 this year at the Brock Education. It's a short essay, right? So if anyone who are interested in the story model in the COVID-19 period, and you may go to that journal to find that article published by Dr. Susan Drake. I think I read that. It's very interesting as well. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that plug.
Okay, so I'm also curious about what book or scholarly work has impacted you thinking as an established scholar in the field of education and the curriculum. What messages does this text convey, and how can these inform practice and theories in the field of curriculum?
So that was a very good question. That question came from you. That's good. I thought about this for a long time because I don't think I can narrow it down to one book. I am a transdisciplinary thinker, and so I see things from many perspectives. But if I go back to the beginning of my doctoral work, probably the book that had the most impact on me for understanding curriculum was Jack Miller's Curriculum Perspectives. And what he does is he looks at 3 different orientations: transmission, sort of being the traditional one, teacher transmits information to the student, and looks like a lot of our traditional classrooms still today. Then he has another model called transaction, where teachers begin to interact, but it's still mostly at the cognitive level. So scientific method is a big part of that. And then finally, he looks at transformation, and that is the holistic model. So it includes all the other things, but it now starts to move into including the things that are actually quite popular today: the social emotional learning, the whole being, the body, mind, the spirit, we're not just looking at a child as somebody who thinks, which we would be doing in the transaction, or something that's a passive learner like in the transmission, but now this is a whole person, and we have to consider that whole person, the head, the hand, and the heart. So that came from Jack, but if I look at then from there, where my specialty has been integrated curriculum. And so the kind of reading that I've done there that I always come back to is the 8-year study that came in 1941, about 8 years of study from the progressive education experiment. That's very interesting. And in that progressive movement are many of the things that I believe should happen today in education. And in that study, they showed that when students actually learned that way, they did better than, as well as at least, and better than most of the students that learned in a traditional way, which has been kind of the thing all along. People would say, oh no, we can't even try to teach in different ways because our students won't do as well on the tests, won't do as well at university. But the 8-year study was run by the big educators of the time. This showed that this is not true. And research ever since has shown that people in integrated programs or interdisciplinary, they do as well as or better. So this is kind of how I've spent most of my time in the research, is writing about that, writing about how we can do an integrated curriculum that's interesting and relevant to the students, and at the same time, especially in the recent past, how we can be accountable to the standards or the competencies or the capabilities that we're required to have students meet through governmental mandates. So that's where I've ended up with. That's the 8-year study. Also informed a lot by work by James Bean and Gordon Vars. And finally, in the narrative, because I can't separate all these are all important to me. The most important person in the narrative was Joseph Campbell and his stories of mythology. That very strongly influenced everything that I did in that area.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for sharing, Dr. Drake. Could you share a little bit of personal experience that have shaped your understanding of a curriculum and education? How has your experience as a research directed your work in curriculum and education?
Well, I have two parts to my career. The first part was as a teacher. The second part was as a researcher. As a teacher, and when I began as a teacher, I was a scared little teacher, and I worked in a school that was mostly boys taking technology, and I had to teach them, 36 boys in this classroom, all in lines. I was the teacher at the front of the room, and I had to teach them grammar, things like that, which they were not very interested in. And one day I had an inspector come into the room, and I was teaching grammar, and the boys, they were good, they weren't bad, they weren't throwing paper balls at each other, they were sitting there, but they would put their hands up, and they'd always give the wrong answer to the question. And they were doing that on purpose, but I didn't know what to do about it. So after the lesson, the man said to me, well, Miss Drake, you better quit teaching. It's clear that you're not cut out for this. And I was very upset, and so I ran off and I cried a few tears. But then I came back and said, okay, then how can I get these boys' attention? And that's how I learned and how I became a constructivist, because I learned that if I made the learning connect to them, if it was relevant, if it was active, if they weren't sitting in rows and me lecturing and all the stuff that a traditional teacher does, then I had their attention. And if I could get them so interested in what they were doing, then I had no discipline problems. I came with that belief system. Also, I was combining different subject areas together. So I taught both phys ed and health and science for a while in English. And when I pulled those things together to make sense for them, or for them to make sense of different, whatever they wanted to study. So it was an integrated approach, really. They also were really engaged. So I came to my doctoral work. I was very passionate. All teachers should learn this. And that's where I found holistic education, which sort of preached that same sort of philosophy. And I found the narrative because I was given the mythology project. And so it all kind of fell together for me. And the research is really just, I've gone out and done presentations on these different things and people have used them. I've watched people, I've learned from what people do, not so much from what books, but I've looked at people's practices and put them together to try to bring together, synthesize the best practices out there. So that's the way I've done it. I know it's kind of the opposite, the way I didn't set a hypothesis and then I didn't do that at all. It came from the ground.
Yeah, that's great. I think, in my opinion, the best research is kind of a growing. So we don't do the research like bringing lots of defined categories or terms or agenda. It's kind of growing. It's like a tree, from my personal experience. And you mentioned that you travel to different places to do the presentation. I also noticed that you have been to Shanghai, China last year, right?
Yes.
To attend a forum about the future of a curriculum and a society. I think it's at the East China Normal University, right?
Yes.
So, in your opinion, what are some of the local issues and the constrain the work of curriculum change, and what are some possibilities that enable changes in the field of curriculum in your context? How are those compared to issues in other locations?
Well, I know that was a very interesting conference that I went to. And so I know that China is looking at a more integrated approach. And they are looking probably to North America for how to do that. But, well, here, one of the things that here, the way, and this is what my work actually does, is how do we interpret curriculum documents so that we can teach things in creative ways? And so our documents are very open-ended, but a teacher has to understand that and be able to interpret it so they see, here's a broad-based standard that I have, and I can meet it in many, many different ways. I don't just have to have a test at the end, or I don't have to do the way the person down the hall is doing it. I can do it in my own way, or a way that fits the context of my students' lives. So that is of just perception. And I have traveled to a lot of countries in Asia and done work talks on these kinds of things. And I have looked at their curriculum, and they are also, for the most part, open-ended as well. So I think, you will have in China, you have major competencies or capabilities that are an umbrella for your whole curriculum. And right. If people kind of begin from that starting point, it's much, much easier to plan something that works for your students than if you have, okay, here's all my little standards, and this is what I have to do today. I have to meet each one of them. For example, here, I've seen this happen. In our documents, we have the scientific method. It's in every single science course, and there's about 7 different smaller standards that make it up. And for most teachers, they see that, this is a scientific method. It's a package. It's the whole in the inquiry. But a few teachers, very few, they do them one step at a time. So as they do that one step at a time, the student loses the sense, this is an inquiry that I'm beginning here and I'm going to end up here, and it's all part of the same process. I'm not trying to say anything negative here about teachers, because I think teachers are fantastic, and they are actually doing fantastic things. It's unbelievable to me, especially with technology today, the incredible things that teachers are doing. So I'm just trying to give an example of how it can be, you can use the curriculum to your advantage. And I think you could do that in most of the countries that I've been to, and I've looked at a lot of different curriculum documents. They are wide open, but you for example, one country, it's wide open and they want to do STEAM. So that's mandated for everybody to do. You know, STEAM is like it's STEM with the arts in it.
Right.
So science, math, technology, engineering, and the arts. So every teacher's supposed to do it in the country. But every teacher has to do the same thing every day.
Mm-hmm.
So how can that open up the creativity if you are bound by today is Wednesday, today is Friday, October 23rd, and I have to be on page 12 of such and such a book. Mm-hmm. So those are the kinds of things that constrain us, that hold us back. Now, again, a lot of what I'm saying is because you have to have a belief in the teacher and their creativity and their willingness to try out new things and their ability to move their students to the places they need to go. I believe they can do it, especially if they're inspired this way to try and create their curriculum in ways that really connect to students.
Okay, that's great. And yes, so thanks for sharing, Dr. Drake. And also my last question, I think you may probably respond to this, but I also would like to ask again. As we know, the pandemic impacts our life a lot. So in the face of the crisis of COVID-19 pandemic, what do you think might be some new directions of the research on curriculum and education? What educational change in curriculum might we see in light of our experience with COVID-19?
Well, I think it's interesting to see what is happening. I'm reading that, especially for children that are at home, they're doing the online learning, a lot of them are turning to project-based learning. Right. And so they're looking at really integrated approaches to learning. And they're also looking at personalized learning. Now, these were things that were trends for the future. Like in the last book that we did, personalized learning was a big thing. Social emotional learning was a big thing. Mental health was a big thing. But now COVID has really brought these home. That mental health is really important. Social emotional learning, we can't leave out the whole person. The interdisciplinary approach makes more sense when a child is at home trying to put things together, or even working groups online together if they're not face-to-face. And as well, there's all the new literacies. It's amazing what somebody has to know today to function in the world, like the financial literacy and visual literacy. And look at all the technology that's happened. 8 months ago, everybody was complaining that kids were on video gaming. They're so dangerous, and kids weren't allowed any amount of time on with their devices, etc. But now, today, there's a lot of parents who are very, very grateful for their video games. Mm-hmm. And I hear so much people saying, oh, this is so dangerous anymore. Because it's actually, used the right way, it's a fantastic tool. So there's lots of really creative new things that are coming down. And I know it's a really, really hard time for people. And I'm lucky because I'm teaching online already. But the scramble that for teachers to have to get together and put things online and get them to be interesting is really, really challenging at university level too. So, but people are rising to the challenge, and I think out of this, some really interesting, much more holistic, much more transdisciplinary things will emerge, which isn't to say we're going to get rid of disciplines. So we need the background of the disciplines, but moving in much more real world ways to look at education.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Drake, for sharing a wonderful insights, and much appreciated.